Every club. Every day. The Global Sports Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Daily Palace podcast, brought to you by, as we just heard, the Global Sports Podcast Network. I'm your host today on the very first FA Cup special here at the Daily Palace podcast. I am Daniel Tanner and I am joined by Wale Bakari, who's ready, willing and able to talk about the FA Cup and talk about Palace with me for the next half hour or so. You all right there, Wale?
Yeah, I'm all right, Dan. Great to be on the pod tonight. The FA Cup is back. It's many years ago, I never really, loved that FA Cup weekend because you get a lot of league football action in the EPL, and then there is that break, and then there's the FA Cup, and once or twice you get very challenging teams, and you're excited about, but a lot of times you also want to get a team that you can at least get a victory, or you feel comfortable of getting a victory over, and then moving on to the next round. But I think I've gotten used to the FA Cup weekend, so it's one I'm looking forward to, especially with the United Arsenal game as well in the third round this year. So I'm quite looking forward to it.
Yeah, I remember that because I actually watched the draw, and my brother was sitting there watching it, and he's going, "Arsenal, don't get United, don't get United." First out the bag, I was in absolute hysterics. So yeah, with that, today we're going to do a little bit of brief sort of a build up to the FA Cup game, a little bit of Palace history, and a little bit of look at what we think the FA Cup is going to be like this year. And then we are going to have a look at our opponents of Stockport County, which is going to be interesting. And if there's any transfer news that's come out in the next has come out over the last couple of days, and then finally we'll get on to our final thoughts on the game and our score predictions. So let's dive right in. So a relatively brief history of Palace in the FA Cup is that we traditionally go out in the third round, mainly because we get drawn up against another mid-table team, and we're just usually either in the middle of a bad injury crisis or some kind of just poor form, but it's generally goes out in the early rounds. But we have been to the final twice against Man United, twice in the space one in the 90s and in 2016. So with that being said, Wale, do we think Glasner can push us further into the cup, especially with his record in the League Cup games earlier in the year?
Well, it is very possible. Nothing is impossible, especially the FA Cup particularly is known for a lot of shocks, known for a lot of unexpected things happening. Not many people expected Palace to get to the final in 2016, but the Eagles did, so it's very, very possible this season. I was listening to Glasner earlier talking about how he has good memories with cups, particularly. I'm sure he was hoping to go further than the quarterfinals in the League Cup, but then after some great performances, particularly away at Aston Villa, Palace was stopped by an Arsenal side who, of course, are looking to get some trophy under their belt after a couple of years as well. So, yeah, it's very possible, but it will start with a good result against Stockport. And I tell you what, because of the notoriety of the FA Cup for shocks from League One, League Two sides, it might be one where Glasner is looking at it and saying, I really don't care. Yes, it would be great to have a wonderful performance, especially with the situation with the squad at the moment. Some of the news coming in the last couple of hours about some of the players. It might not really care about the performance. It will be one where he just wants to get the result done, just not get embarrassed by the League Two side, who are also, to be honest, not on a very great run of form. They started the season great. Although they remain promotion hopefuls, I think they're seventh in League Two, just one place outside of the playoff places. So it would just not want to be embarrassed by Stockport in any fashion. It wouldn't want his team to be run ragged by a League Two side. All it would want is be efficient about the way they go about the game, be professional about it, get the result. Just not. It would normally. Most teams would be looking at resting players in the FA Cup against Stockport, but for Palace, you would expect to see some of the regular faces in the squad. So it would want to get the job done as quickly as possible, be able to bring out some players, put some fringe players on if there are many, for Palace. But it's just one of those where he would just want to get the result and just move on to the next round. And I'm sure that's what Stockport will be looking to do as well. But it's very crucial. A loss for Stockport might not necessarily be a shock to them, but a loss for Palace would definitely be another shock starting, the FA Cup this season.
Yeah, definitely. We don't want to be the one that goes out to the minnows of the league. We don't want a shock upset at Sellers Park. But from going on what Glasner's been doing in the League Cup games was basically put out a full squad to make sure he gets the result. So I'm expecting him to put out the strongest squad he has available to him, just to essentially get over the line, get into the next round, and then go from there. He's sort of done fairly well in sort of the tournament so far. I think he missed out last year because he came in at the back end of the season. So this is his real chance to put down some kind of benchmark of we want to be at least be able to compete in the tournaments, which is something we never really had before. As I mentioned earlier, we're normally out of these tournaments basically at the earliest convenience. League Cup we normally get out in the first or second round. FA Cup we're out by the first time we're in it, which is the third round. For those of you who don't know, Premiership teams go through automatically into the third round, so we go in and then we go out immediately. So, but going on his sort of form in the Cup so far, I'm fairly confident we can get. I think we could probably get to sort of maybe the quarterfinal if we get a bit lucky. But are there any other matches in the FA Cup this weekend that you're kind of looking forward to? Any kind of upsets or just general games that you really want to see a good performance from? Wale, you're still muted, mate. You might want to try the technical difficulties there.
I tend to do that once or twice.
Let's try that again.
Anyway, I was just saying that because the big game of the round is the Arsenal United game. United coming off good performance against Liverpool in the Premier League at Anfield. They will be backing themselves to go to the Emirates, where Arsenal are not. They're not in the form that they want to be at the moment. Saka is injured. I think the man who came in to replace him, Ethan Nwaneri, is also injured at the moment. They, they lost their game against Newcastle, struggled. They created a couple of chances, but they were there for the taking. So I'm sure, United were also not in a great place at the moment under the new manager. Would be looking together. So that looks like a great game. There's also another all Premier League clash in Aston Villa and West Ham. West Ham, who've just had Graham Potter, come in. It's interesting when I look at West Ham because they were in Europe for I think 5 of the last 7 seasons, and they just looked at themselves and thought, no, we're not enjoying this. We don't like this guy, and they sacked their manager, David Moyes, who, by the way, looks like might be going back to Everton. And then they've brought in all sorts of managers, and they're just in a place they don't like. So Aston Villa West Ham would be, another interesting game to look into. Of course, Liverpool are playing Accrington Town. I hope there's no shock there because Liverpool have not, they've drawn against United and they lost to Tottenham in the last game. You will be looking to rest players, but I hope that there will be no shock there. But yeah, those are some of the games I will be looking out for. I will, of course, watch Liverpool. Will watch Palace and Arsenal, United. I don't know. There's it's the FA Cup. There's a very long list. Well, there's Man City, Salford. That could be interesting. Salford, of course, also very close to the Manchester clubs, owned by the Manchester United legends. Would be interesting, to see them against City and see what they can do. They're chasing promotion as well. And the Salford Man City game has resurrected, the name Ryan Giggs in some of the news in the last couple of days. I saw an article by the BBC talking about how Giggs has, gone under the radar a bit after his legal issues and all, but I think he is now director of football in Salford, where he owns 10%, by the way. And interestingly, he started his career as a junior with City before moving to United. So it would be interesting, to see the City Salford game. City are getting back to, well, on the results that they've had the last couple of games, are getting back to maybe the form that they used to be. But maybe City Salford would be another great game as well. But come on, it's all about Palace Stockport this weekend. Actually,
it's all about the Palace Salford game. I don't. The other local derbies don't mean anything. Like the old, Liverpool, essentially a Liverpool derby, a Manchester derby, essentially in the cup finals, in the cups, which they're always great when they're actually local ones. But also on that note, we also got to mention that the Palace women's team are also in FA Cup action this weekend against Sheffield United. I think they're playing at the Sutton United ground, whatever it is called now, what used to be called Gander Green Lane. So I think they're playing on the Saturday as well. So we're going to be going for them too. So don't forget to cheer for the Palace women's team as well as the men's team this weekend. And on that note, we are going to take a brief break while we thank the lovely providers here at Zencaster that allow us to talk nonsense about Palace for half hour or so every day. Here at Global Sports Podcast Network, we spent a lot of time selecting our delivery platform. Zencaster came out the clear winner, with 4K video recording from your phone and AI editing that automatically removes all those ums, ahs, and it's easy to start a podcast. It sounds great, and it's delivered effectively. If you're ready to tell your story, check out the link below in the description to learn more about Zencaster. And we're back with the Daily Palace podcast, brought to you by the Global Sports Podcast Network. In this section, we are going to briefly talk about our opponents on the weekend, Stockport County FC, who have been doing relatively well in League One at the moment. It's currently, as Wale brought up earlier, currently 7th. They started off well, but they have run into a little bit of a sort of not so brilliant patch of form. Also, from what I can gather from the results sheet, they haven't had the best away form, not winning since the end of November. So as they're coming to Selhurst Park, it's essentially a away game. So the odds may be in our favour. So is there any other sort of thoughts or any other things you want to bring up about Stockport County? Because I know we're both sort of Premiership supporting teams. We may not pay attention to the lower leagues, but you got any sort of anything else to want to add to it, Wale?
Well, to be honest, you make a good point about the away form, but if there's anything we've seen in the FA Cup is that home or away, anything could happen over the years, and I'm sure Stockport will be going to Selhurst on Sunday with all the belief and thinking we can actually just go for it and get a result. So it's one Palace would really need to be on the lookout for. Yeah, they started the season with ambitions. They started a bit badly. Incidentally, League One is one that I tend to just take a quick look at because of the Nollywood interest in Wrexham, and I'm just quite interested to see what's going on with them. And they're third at the moment. I think they're level on points with the team that are second. It's Wycombe Wanderers. I think Birmingham are the ones leading the League One table. So Stockport are currently 7th. They're still chasing promotion, but they've got one or two players you might want to look out for. There is one of the players, Louis Barry, the forward, has got 15 goals this season. So that's a player that definitely is one to look out for. I think it's from the Aston Villa Academy or thereabouts. So they've got some talent about them. They tend to play. And part of the very interesting thing these days is many years ago you find some brand of football in the Premier League, maybe the top 10 sides in the Premier League. And then there's another brand of football lower down the leagues. But now you find teams in League One, League Two trying to play out from the back because of the fact that, there's now players coming in from the academies of the Premier League sides, and there's a lot of influence of foreign coaches and just a lot of all these things. So they play some quite they are able to mix things up. They get physical when they need to be. They play some good brand of football when they need to be. Lucky for Palaces, they also are able to mix things up on the Glasner. This Palace side can dominate when they're given the space. We saw it in the games in the League Cup against QPR, for example, and a couple of other games in the Premier League that they've done well. But we also know that this is a team that can grind out results. Remember, I know a lot of Palace fans don't always want to remember, but Palace were themselves in the EFL side of things. They were in the Championship just a couple of years ago. So the guys in the club understand, grinding out results against the lower sides. And, Glasner will be looking to get a good result in his first FA Cup game. So Stockport, they are very well a dangerous side. Bearing also in mind that it's the FA Cup, and as I've said over and over, you really cannot predict, some of these teams that come from the lower league. So it will be an interesting game. But yes, they've got some players that could out Palace, and that Palace better be aware of that.
Oh, I definitely hope that they are aware of that. But it's always a fun bit of the lower clubs in the FA Cup. That's kind of what makes it the FA Cup. You do get this in the League Cup and things like that, but it's just not the same. I don't know why, but it's always fun to have the smaller clubs coming to the big guys and sort of just basically showing them maybe a little bit what lower league football is all about. It's more fun when it's the other way around, though. It's more fun when you get the big teams coming to the smaller clubs that have got the muddy pitches and the sort of world-class players sitting on park benches instead of these lovely cushioned benches that they have up in the Premiership. So, but we're looking forward to this, and as many of you Palace sort of long-time Palace fans will know, we are no stranger to Stockport County. We had to play them to stay in the old Division 1 on the last day of the season before, so we know what it's like playing against. I know this is 20 something years ago now, but it's we know when we have to make it count. So I'm still fairly confident about the game going forward. So we'll also bring up some transfer and even some managerial news, as it's been a little bit quiet. It's been a dry January, if you want to coin a phrase, as it's been very quiet in the January transfer window. But we got to talk about the managerial shift at Everton of essentially sacking their manager only a few hours before an FA Cup game, and then going back essentially to their ex and bringing back David Moyes. Seems to be the heavy favourite, which I'm not so sure. They're basically changing like for like. I don't see Moyes changing Everton all that much compared to Dyche. Got any thoughts on that, Wale?
Well, to be honest, I'm hoping it doesn't change them. I'm hoping things don't improve for them. But it was really great when it was there. They at that time were seen as overachieving. But then they had a wonderful squad of players at the time. That Everton side had Arsenal manager now, Mikel Arteta, had Tim Cahill up front at some point, had Osman, had Leighton Baines at some point. They did bring in some exciting players at other points as well. So, and I remember particularly, I think it was just the season Liverpool won the Champions League. I think they finished fourth in the Premier League that season. They then went on to lose to Villarreal in the Champions League qualifiers. Villarreal, by the way, lost out in the semi-final to Arsenal. I could never forget that game. One Roman Riquelme lost a penalty, and they could have faced Barca in the final. But anyway, Arsenal had to suffer in the final, so they had to win that game. But he's one of those managers that gets the result over a long run. Yes, he's it wasn't great this time at United. Sunderland wasn't entirely great for him as well, but particularly at West Ham, winning the European Conference League, having that run in the Europa League. I think they got to the semi-final in the Europa League as well the next season. You could see that, yes, they would have that period where they're in a bad run of form, but over the long period, over the season, you could look at them and say, well, maybe he's able to grind out a good season with teams, of course, when he gets the support. And you look at this Everton team at the moment, they're not the worst side, although sometimes, although I think that the mentality of Sean Dyche also feeds into them as well, because you find them running back so much a lot of times. They've got Njai, they've got Calvert-Lewin, who was, I don't know, he's not in a great form. Decore, was a great player or remains an energetic, good player. But with the current squad, yes, they've got some talent, but Myers would have his work cut out for him. But as I said, because of my personal biases, as you know, I'm really hoping that it changes nothing for them, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm definitely not expecting, especially with West Ham not really going much better than they were before. So he'll grind out a result. He'll steady the ship for a year or two, and then they'll probably try and start looking for somebody a little bit more dynamic or a little bit more sort of modern. But it will probably just keep them going for a little while longer.
It's interesting, I was going to say, Dan, it's interesting what happened to them, because they went from remember when they brought in Roberto Martinez, and then they brought in, they brought in some kind of managers. I think the current Fulham manager was also at Everton at the time. They brought in Benitez. Then they brought in Carlo Ancelotti. Like they looked like they were going one way, and then they just went back to, the trying to grind our results and avoid the drop, and that's exactly where they are.
I think that's where most clubs, I think, from like maybe 10th down, are just thinking on that mentality of just try and grind out as many results as possible, because it is any team can beat anybody from that half down, and even this season anybody can beat anybody. So there's a little bit of transfer news, a little bit of a transfer rumor of Palace are being linked with Roman Essi. I think that's how you pronounce his name. Dubbed the next Alessi from Millwall. He's kind of been on another ongoing story very much since the summer. I have watched a couple of the highlights of him, and yes, he does fit that mold almost to a T. He's almost a carbon copy of him. So, which is another good transfer for us, because we are really lacking in flair players, especially because we can't just rely on Eze to do all the flair and everything. So another guy that's prepared to run down the wings and take people on is always appreciated. Any thoughts on that kind of transfer, Wale? Because it's pretty self-explanatory. So we're going to get a decent deal from a sort of I think Millwall's a championship. It might be League One. I can't remember.
Well, yeah, Millwall, in the championship. I think he's got 4 goals and 1 assist in 24 games. Palace have had some joy bringing in players from the championship of recent. Maybe this will turn out to be another one. But, you talk about watching highlights. Many years ago, I was, involved with player agent who had a couple of players back home in Nigeria, and I used to, bring together YouTube videos for some of the players. A couple of them got some great deals in the Nigerian Premier League. In fact, 1 or 2 of them got great deals in South Africa, and I think one of them in Egypt or something. But the point I'm making is a lot of times when I'm done making those videos, I know it's not as good as what this video looks like, but that's a beautiful thing about highlights, you just bring the great bits into it, and trust me, with good effects you could. But yeah, it does look like a good prospect. It does look like one that is good. But how many have we seen over the years? Players 19-year-old who look like good flair players who look like they can beat a man, and then when they make that step up to the Premier League, they're unable to. I remember when we at the start was it before the start of the season when we talked about players Palace could bring in. I was talking about Philogene. Then he had played for All City, had a great season, but went back to Aston Villa, hasn't been able to make an impact. Now Villa's agreed a deal with Ipswich. Hopefully he's able to get back to the form that he was. So, but that step up to the Premier League is always a bit daunting. Adam Wharton had a great season, joining second half of the season, even got Euro call up, but hasn't had a great season. This one, of course, he's been marred by injuries as well. But that step up to the Premier League is always a difficult one. But at Knighton is definitely one for the future. If he's going to come good, then. But I'm not very, very confident. But I can only be hopeful.
That's all we can ask, is be hopeful. We get him on a decent price, then we're not. It's not too much of a loss if he doesn't turn out or anything. But he looks pretty good, and it's kind of the player we're after. So on that note, we're going to take a last little break to thank the network that also allows us to do this every single day. And then after that, we're going to do a last little bit of FA Cup preview for the match, get you like last little bit of hype, and our score predictions.
This podcast is part of the Global Sports Podcast Network, the only network bringing you exclusive daily news and views on your Premier League team, the Premier League, women's football, and fantasy football. A unique listening experience that puts fans first, bringing you the very latest breaking news from your team. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and make us your first listen every day. Global Sports Podcast Network. Every club, every day.
And we're back for the final part of the Daily Palace podcast, the FA Cup special. Right, so we are now going to talk very last little bits on what we think the game is going to be like on Saturday, and our final our score predictions. So, Wale, what do you think the score is going to be, and how do you think the game is going to turn out?
Well, it's most likely going to be one because of what we've heard about some of the players that are unavailable for Palace. So we're not entirely certain what Palace side will be playing tomorrow. On Sunday rather. The defense line would be a bit different. I won't be surprised if we, see names like Nathaniel Klein, filling in at in the three-man defense. So we don't know what to expect in the midfield. Will be missing the game. Adam Wharton is not available, so it might be Lema, Adokore, maybe Kamada. So it will be a very a lot of players that have played this season, but maybe not players that have necessarily played together. So we'll see. Maybe Edin Ketia will get a run out tomorrow as well, starting. So it will be a relatively new Palace side. But the good news about that is, yes, there is some opportunities there for players to show what they can do. Maybe the Onga will propel, players to really put in a good shift. But for a Stockport side that are relatively, having a good season, they would look at themselves and say, we might just as well go for it. That's what lower league sides do in the FA Cup anyway. They just see how far they can go and try to get a result, and that's exactly what they will do. So it's one where Palace would have to, manage the game well, assert their dominance as quickly as they can, get a goal or two as quickly as they can, and just hope that it will be a good result at the end of the day. I'm looking at a game that we'll see Stockport come out, trying to get a result, maybe get a goal, but I'm backing Palace to get a victory. 3-1, I think it would be to Palace.
So you're going to go 3-1? Okay, yeah, because I probably would agree with you that Palace side is probably going to be a little bit rotated, especially when during the news conference this morning, the likes of Mateta, Lacroix, and Tyreek Mitchell didn't do any training due to illness. And I also did see that Henderson, I think, went out later in the day due to the same illness. So there seems to be a bug going around in the Palace team. So looking at listing them off, them being some key players, they'll probably be slightly rotated. Like, Nathaniel Klein will probably get a shout. Might see, I'm not sure who you're going to put in the left wing back position, but we'll find somebody. You might even see Joe Ward get a run out if it's the FA Cup against a lower league team. But very much, I'm definitely expecting Stockport to go for it, at least for a while. But I think the Premiership quality and the talent and the endurance and the strength will come out eventually. But I'm going to go for a 2-0, just relatively comfortable 2-0. We go through to the next round, and then we probably somehow get City or United or whatever, and then we have this. Then we just go up. Then we just go out. Then I think. But if we can get into the next round, I'll be happy. I'm not looking for a FA Cup run. If we get it, cool. If it happens, brilliant. I just don't really see it happening. All right. And on that note, I think we shall leave it there. Thank you, Wale, for your time and your insights today.
Always a pleasure. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you very much. This has been the Global Sports Podcast Network that is letting us do this. So if you could give us 5 stars, it helps us get noticed. Just remember, it's a Daily Palace podcast, 5 stars.
Every club, every day. The Global Sports Podcast Network.